The wedding should have been the happiest day of her life, but it ended in chaos. He hit her, in front of hundreds of people, on their wedding day. And the most shocking part? It was all captured on security footage. But that wasn't the worst part. The footage made his own father disown him forever, and the secrets about to unfold will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. This is a story of betrayal, love, and power. But who can you trust when everything falls apart? Before we dive deeper, hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to see how this ends, and comment below, where are you watching from? Was Josh right to do what he did, or does he deserve to lose everything? Don't just watch from the sidelines. If you're not subscribed, you're making a huge mistake. You won't want to miss the shocking twists coming next. Subscribe now, or you'll be left behind. The truth is, no one saw this coming. Josh's world was about to implode in ways no one could predict. But the biggest twist? It's still to come. Stay with us, because everything is about to change. The grand ballroom echoed with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses, the perfect backdrop to a wedding that was supposed to be the start of a new life. The chandeliers sparkled above, casting golden light on the immaculate guests, each more polished than the last. Melissa stood at the altar, her heart racing, her hands trembling in the soft lace of her gown. Her eyes darted nervously to Josh, her groom, standing just a few feet away. Josh Montgomery, the billionaire heir to the Montgomery Empire, was every bit the picture of success. Tall, chiseled with a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. His gaze, however, was anything but calm. His face, usually a mask of control, betrayed the weight of something darker, a storm raging behind those eyes. The crowd's adoring looks, the whispers of the elite, all felt like a distant hum to him. He wasn't listening, not really. His mind was somewhere else, and that was the problem. Melissa caught his eye, a fleeting glance that should have been filled with affection, but it was more like a desperate plea. A plea for something, for answers, for love, for reassurance that today wasn't the beginning of a nightmare. The priest's voice broke through her thoughts, the traditional vows rolling off his tongue. Do you, Josh Montgomery, take Melissa to be your lawfully wedded wife? Josh's lips parted, but instead of the usual vows of devotion, something unexpected came out. I will break you in bed, he whispered, just loud enough for Melissa to hear. The words struck her like a physical blow, not out of malice, but something darker, an unspoken promise, a threat veiled in passion. She blinked, confused, the weight of his words settling over her like a shadow. She stared at him, the man she thought she knew, wondering what had happened to the sweet, protective fiancé who had once whispered that he would never hurt her. But before she could process his words, before the shock could register in her mind, he moved. His hand lashed out, quick and without hesitation, striking her across the cheek. The sound of skin on skin echoed throughout the ballroom, louder than the music, louder than the chatter. Gasps filled the room, but it wasn't the shock of a slap. It was the disbelief. The silence that followed was deafening. Melissa's hand flew to her face, her mind racing to comprehend what had just happened. The cameras, those ever-present symbols of wealth and spectacle, captured every second, every movement, every expression, but none of them could capture the hurt in her eyes, the confusion twisting in her stomach. This wasn't love. This was something else. As the guests stood frozen, Josh's father, Gregory Montgomery, stepped forward from the crowd. His cold eyes swept over the scene, assessing it, calculating how much damage this would cause. Without a word, he walked up to Josh and, in a low, controlled voice, whispered something only his son could hear. The words were sharp, filled with fury. Then, turning to the room, Gregory addressed the guests with a chilling calm. "Get the footage," he commanded. "Everything needs to be recorded. This will be handled swiftly." The crowd began to murmur, eyes flicking to the nearest security cameras, but no one dared to speak. The social elite were too stunned to react. Melissa didn't know what hurt more, The physical strike or the realization that the man she had married, the man she had trusted, was no longer the person she thought he was. The cameras, the footage, the whispers, they would follow her forever now. And as she stood there, with tears barely holding back, a dark thought crossed her mind. Could she ever escape this? She glanced at Josh, who now stood with his back turned, his shoulders hunched as though he too was carrying the weight of something far heavier than his own actions. As she turned to leave, the last words she heard from him were chilling, carried by the distant echo of a broken vow. I didn't want this, but I had no choice. In that moment, the world seemed to fall away, and she was left standing alone in a room full of people who would never understand. Alone, not just in her pain, but in the horror of a life she couldn't yet comprehend. The days that followed the wedding were a blur. The world outside seemed to move in slow motion, while Melissa's life had come to a standstill. The footage, now everywhere, had ignited a firestorm. Tabloids were calling it the wedding disaster, a scandal that no one could have predicted, least of all Melissa. She thought she knew Josh, thought she knew everything about him, but that slap, those cold, ruthless words, had shattered everything. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from concerned friends, reporters trying to get the story, and even her own family members, who were just as confused and heartbroken. But none of them knew the whole story. No one had seen what happened behind the closed doors of that ballroom. No one knew the weight of Josh's silence. Melissa sat in the dim light of her apartment, her hands folded tightly in her lap as she stared at the news on TV. They were replaying the footage again, Josh's slap, her stunned face, the gasps of the crowd. A muted echo of the day that would haunt her forever. But it wasn't the public shame that hurt the most. It was the fact that Josh hadn't called, hadn't tried to explain. Hours passed before her phone finally rang. The name that appeared on the screen made her stomach drop. Josh Montgomery. She hesitated for a moment, then answered. Melissa. His voice was strained, distant. I need to explain. She clenched her jaw, her thoughts racing. You think there's anything left to explain? I know how this looks, he continued, his tone soft. But I didn't mean to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt you. You did hurt me, she snapped, her voice trembling. And I don't know why you thought you could get away with it. You hit me, Josh, in front of everyone. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. She could hear him breathe, a deep, almost defeated sound. I was under pressure. You don't understand. Pressure? She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Pressure from what, Josh? From your father? Is that what you're saying? Melissa, please, just let me explain. Please, I need you to understand. But Melissa couldn't. She didn't want to understand. The image of him striking her, the cruelty in his eyes, it was too much. She wasn't just hurt by what he did, but by the fact that he let it happen. No words could explain that. She hung up without another word, the echo of the call reverberating in her mind. He was a stranger, a man she barely recognized. She sank into the couch, her heart heavy with a truth she didn't want to face. A knock on the door broke her thoughts. When she opened it, there stood Gregory Montgomery. Josh's father. His cold, calculating gaze met hers, as always, but today there was something different, something darker. The man who had always carried himself with unshakable authority seemed out of place in her humble apartment. Melissa, he greeted, his voice steady, devoid of emotion. We need to talk. She crossed her arms over her chest, her eyes narrowing. About what? About what happened, Gregory said. You're a smart woman, Melissa. I'm sure you've already started to piece together the situation. Her throat tightened. Don't pretend you're concerned, Gregory. What do you want? He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click. I'm concerned, yes. You need to understand something about my son. His eyes flicked to the floor as if he were choosing his next words carefully. Josh's actions weren't entirely his own. Melissa's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? Are you blaming this on me?" No, not at all." He paused, eyes narrowing. "What you saw at the wedding, the slap, it wasn't meant for you exactly. Josh was cornered. His life has never truly been his own. He's been manipulated, controlled by me for as long as he can remember." She stared at him, her thoughts a whirlwind. "You're telling me that he hit me because of you?" Gregory's face remained unreadable. "Not just because of me. The pressure to uphold the family legacy, to carry on the Montgomery name, has always been too much. He wasn't prepared for the responsibility, and I've pushed him into things he wasn't ready for." He paused. "Things we weren't ready for, but this wasn't supposed to happen. I never intended for it to get this far. Then why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you protect him from himself?" Melissa's voice cracked, raw with anger. "He didn't even apologize. He's done nothing but hide from me. And now you're here, trying to justify his actions." Gregory sighed deeply, a heaviness to his posture. "I came here to offer you something, Melissa. I can make sure this goes away, the footage, the scandal, everything." Melissa shook her head. "You think money will fix this?" "It's not just money," Gregory said, his tone quieter now. "It's power, influence, connections. I can make sure no one remembers this day, and Josh's future remains intact. But you have to work with me." A cold chill ran down her spine. She could feel the weight of his words, the temptation of a life without this nightmare. But the idea of being bought, of being controlled, it sickened her. "I'll never be part of your game," she said, her voice steady. "I want nothing from you or your family." Gregory didn't flinch. He just nodded, as if he had already known her answer. "Very well. But don't say I didn't offer." As he turned to leave, Melissa's heart beat louder in her chest, a drum of uncertainty and anger. What was she going to do now? She had no family to run to, no real support beyond herself. Her love for Josh was shattered, and the pieces of his broken world had left her with nothing but her own fragile sense of self. The door closed behind Gregory, and she was left in the silence of her apartment, staring at the phone that had once connected her to Josh. But now, the lines were severed, and she knew, deep down, this was just the beginning of a much darker journey. The days blurred into one another, and Melissa's thoughts were a tangle of hurt, betrayal, and confusion. She hadn't spoken to Josh since that night. His call earlier had left her feeling more lost than before. He wanted to explain, he said, but every time she thought of his face, the look of cold detachment as he struck her, her body trembled in disgust. What had happened to him? The weight of Gregory's words still hung over her. He spoke as though his son's actions could simply be swept away with a wave of his hand, as though Melissa was just another pawn in a game they controlled. But it wasn't that simple. Not for her. Not after everything she had just witnessed. The silence was unbearable, and the reality that Josh hadn't reached out again made the emptiness even more painful. She had trusted him, loved him. But now, she didn't know who he was anymore. On the 5th day, when the weight of solitude became too much, Melissa decided to face him. She found him at his penthouse, sitting in the center of the vast living room, staring out over the city. He was in a suit, his usual uniform, yet it did nothing to mask the exhaustion in his eyes. The anger had faded into something deeper, something broken. He didn't hear her at first. She stood there for a long moment, watching him as he seemed lost in his own world. His shoulders were slumped, his posture defeated. "Josh?" she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. He didn't turn right away. When he did, his face softened for a fraction of a second before it hardened again. "Melissa," he said her name with so much weight, as if the mere sound of it brought him pain. "I didn't know how to tell you the truth. I didn't want you to see me like this." She shook her head. What happened to you, Josh? The man I married. He's not the same person I see standing here now. Josh's eyes flickered with a pain that mirrored her own. He looked like a man who had been broken long before the wedding, long before the strike. I don't know when it started, he murmured, but it's been my whole life, my father's expectations, the business, the weight of everything on me. And when you walked into my life, I thought you'd be the escape. I thought maybe I could live for once. But, he trailed off, his voice cracking. But I was wrong. I wasn't ready. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know how to protect you. Protect me? Melissa repeated bitterly. You struck me, Josh, in front of everyone. You shattered any trust I had left. He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration rising. I know I hurt you, and I will never forgive myself for it. But Melissa, it wasn't what it seemed. My father, he's been controlling every aspect of my life for so long. He made me feel like I was worthless unless I did exactly as he told me. And when he threatened to take everything from me, the family business, my inheritance, my future, I couldn't stand up to him. Then why didn't you tell me? Her voice was trembling now. Why didn't you trust me, Josh? You could have told me the truth. I thought you'd leave me, he said, voice raw. I thought if you knew the real me, the broken, powerless son of a billionaire, you'd leave me. I thought I'd lose you like everything else in my life. His words hit her like a wave, and for a moment she could see the hurt, the fear in his eyes. She had always known him as strong, the successful heir to the Montgomery fortune. But now she saw the cracks, the man who had been shaped by his father's expectations, living in a gilded cage of his own making. The silence stretched between them. Melissa's heart ached with sympathy, but the weight of what had happened at the wedding still hovered over her. The slap, the humiliation, the violence. I don't know what to do with this, Josh, she said, shaking her head. You've shattered everything. What am I supposed to do now? How do I even trust you again? I don't deserve your trust, he said softly, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn it back. I know I've hurt you more than I can ever fix, but please, please don't leave me. I swear, I'll change. I'll leave my father's world behind if that's what it takes to make this right. Melissa's heart twisted. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to see the man she had once fallen in love with, the one who had promised to protect her, to cherish her. But the reality of the wedding, of the slap, of the betrayal, those images kept replaying in her mind like a broken record. She closed her eyes, trying to push past the pain. I don't know, Josh. I don't know if I can forgive you. He stood up, stepping toward her, his eyes desperate. Please, Melissa, just give me a chance. I'll do anything. I know I've lost your trust, but I'll work every single day to earn it back. Just let me prove it to you. But Melissa couldn't make the decision just yet. She couldn't find the right words, couldn't decide if she even wanted to fight for a relationship that had already been broken. She turned away from him, her voice soft but resolute. I need time, Josh. I can't just pretend this didn't happen. He nodded, his face falling. I understand, he whispered. The door clicked softly behind her as she stepped out of the penthouse, leaving Josh alone, staring at the city lights that seemed to mock him. Melissa's chest tightened as she descended the elevator. She felt like she was drowning in the weight of everything that had happened. The love she had once shared with Josh now felt like a distant memory, and the future that once seemed bright was clouded with doubt. In the quiet of her apartment, she sat by the window, gazing out into the night. The city stretched before her, full of opportunities, but also full of ghosts. She didn't know if she could go back to the life she once had, and she didn't know if Josh could ever truly redeem himself. All she knew was that she couldn't stay in this limbo forever. Something had to change, but what that change would look like, she wasn't sure. And deep inside, she knew one thing for certain: the worst was yet to come. The following days were a blur of confusion, unanswered questions, and an overwhelming silence from Josh. Melissa had expected him to reach out again, to somehow try to rebuild the trust he had shattered, but all she received were empty text messages, words that meant nothing after the slap, after the betrayal. She couldn't escape the heavy weight of everything that had been said and done. It wasn't until one rainy afternoon that a knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She had just returned from her morning walk when she found herself face to face with a woman she hadn't seen before, but who looked oddly familiar. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, her voice polite but firm. "My name is Lena. I'm here about Josh." Melissa's stomach twisted at the mention of his name. "What about him?" she asked, trying to mask the unease in her voice. Lena stepped inside, glancing around briefly before locking eyes with Melissa. "I think it's time you knew the whole truth about Josh and his past," she said, her words laced with a heaviness that immediately made Melissa's heart skip. "The truth he's been hiding from you." Melissa's mind raced. She didn't know whether to feel suspicious or grateful for this woman's sudden appearance, but there was a quiet urgency in Lena's tone that made her listen intently. "Look, I don't want to hurt you," Lena continued, "but Josh is not the man you think he is. You've seen the violence, the anger, right? That's not all there is. He's been carrying this burden for a long time." "Just get to the point," Melissa said, her voice sharp, almost pleading. She couldn't stand the mystery any longer. She needed answers, no matter how painful they were. Lena hesitated for a moment, looking down at the floor as if considering her words carefully. "I used to be close to Josh. I knew him when he was younger, before all the power, before the fame. I was his first love." The words hung in the air between them, a bombshell Melissa hadn't been prepared for. "You were what?" Melissa asked, her voice trembling. Lena nodded, her gaze filled with a sadness that seemed to match the depth of the situation. "His father, Gregory, didn't approve of me. I was too common for their standards, and Josh, even back then, didn't have the strength to stand up to his father. We were forced to end things, but it wasn't just that. Josh has been haunted by the things his father made him do. Haunted by the fact that he had to choose between family and love, and he lost both." Melissa's mind was spinning. "What are you saying? That Josh chose his father over you? Over me?" Her voice rose, the pain evident in every word. Lena looked down at her hands, clasped tightly in front of her. "Josh never chose. He never had the power to choose. And that's what's been eating him up inside. Gregory controlled every part of his life, his relationships, his choices. Josh has been trying to live up to his father's expectations for years, and he's failed. And every time he fails, he becomes more like the man he hates." Melissa's chest tightened as she processed Lena's words. She wanted to be angry, to shout, to demand why Josh hadn't told her this himself, but instead, she felt a deep sadness creeping in. A sadness for Josh, a man who had been bound by chains invisible to the world. "Why are you telling me this?" Melissa asked, her voice hoarse. "Because I think it's time someone else knows the truth," Lena replied softly. "The truth about what Josh has been through, what he's running from, and maybe, just maybe, you can help him break free." The silence between them was heavy, pregnant with the weight of everything that had been revealed. Melissa stood there for a moment, lost in thought. She could feel the rage bubbling inside her, the sense of betrayal that seemed to have no end. But she also felt something else, a strange empathy for Josh, for the man she had once loved. "Is there more?" Melissa asked quietly, her voice breaking the silence. Lena hesitated, then nodded. "There's one more thing you need to know. When Josh was with me, it wasn't just the family that caused the rift. Josh's father knew what we had. He threatened me, made it clear I wasn't welcome in his world. I didn't realize the extent of the control he had over Josh until I tried to leave. But that's the thing about Gregory. He never lets go of what he owns." "Josh didn't just walk away from love," Melissa whispered, her voice barely audible. "He was forced." Lena nodded gravely. "Exactly. And when he came back into your life, when he met you, he wanted something real, something he thought he could have. But then the pressure, the expectations, and that past, it all caught up with him, and when he was faced with his father's demands, he couldn't escape. Melissa's mind was racing now. She thought back to the wedding, Josh's cold eyes, the slap. She thought of the past few days, the silence, the uncertainty. All the pieces were beginning to fall into place. But even as the truth began to unravel, she couldn't decide if she should feel pity for Josh or if she was simply being manipulated once again. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Melissa asked, the hurt creeping into her voice. Lena gave a sad smile. "Because Josh wasn't ready to face it, and neither were you." She was right. Melissa wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to face the broken man Josh had become, or the reality of the twisted hold his father had over him. But something inside her was shifting, and she knew that no matter what, the choices she made next would define the rest of her life. Could she accept Josh for who he truly was, flaws and all? Could she forgive the man who had hurt her so deeply? Or would the past be too much for them to overcome? As Lena turned to leave, she placed a hand on Melissa's arm, her touch gentle. "You're stronger than you think. Don't let anyone tell you who you should be or who you should love." And with that, Lena was gone. Melissa stood in the quiet of her apartment, the rain tapping lightly on the windows. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something far bigger than herself. The truth about Josh had changed everything. The question was no longer just about whether she could forgive him. It was about whether she could move forward, whether she could make peace with a world full of shadows and lies. And somehow, despite everything, she knew she had to make the choice. The world outside Melissa's apartment felt like it was moving in fast forward. The news had spread like wildfire. Josh Montgomery's violent outburst at his wedding had become the headline of every tabloid, the subject of every gossip blog, and a topic of heated discussions in every upscale cafe in the city. Every time Melissa turned on her phone, there it was. The video, the slap, the gasp of the crowd, the look in her eyes as she stood frozen in shock. The footage, captured by an overhead camera at the venue, had made its way into every social media platform, and the online commentary was ruthless. Some sympathized with her, some blamed her, and others mocked Josh's failure to control his emotions. It felt like the entire world was weighing in on her pain. But it wasn't just the public backlash that weighed heavily on Melissa's mind. It was the complete and utter silence from Josh. He had reached out once more after their conversation, but his words had been empty, as though he was still trapped in a world that was impossible to escape. That evening, Melissa sat on her couch, scrolling through endless messages and media coverage. Her phone buzzed again, another message from an unknown number. This time it wasn't from Josh, but from someone far more dangerous, Gregory Montgomery. The message was short, cold, and devoid of any warmth. "Melissa, I can help you make this go away. You can't hide from this forever. We can arrange for everything to be erased. All you have to do is cooperate." It hit her like a punch to the gut. The arrogance, the control. Gregory Montgomery wasn't just trying to clean up his son's mess. He was trying to pull her into the family's twisted web, just as he had done to Josh. His words lingered in her mind as she considered the implications. He had the power, the money, the influence. He could make the scandal disappear in an instant, silence the tabloids, and make her world go back to normal. But at what cost? She couldn't escape the feeling that this was all part of the same game she had unwillingly been thrust into. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a message. It was a call. Melissa's heart skipped when she saw the name, Josh Montgomery. Taking a deep breath, she answered, "Melissa, please, I need to talk to you." Josh's voice crackled through the phone, laced with desperation. "I know I haven't been what you needed, but this isn't what I wanted. My father, he's made everything worse. I've tried to keep you safe from all of this, but I've failed. I'm sorry." Melissa didn't know what to say. The wound was too deep, and she wasn't sure she could heal it. "Josh, you've been hiding from the truth for too long. You hurt me, and you're still hiding behind excuses. It's too late." "I know, but Melissa, you need to understand. This is bigger than us. It's my family. It's the business. I've always been their puppet. I never had control. But now, I can't keep letting them use me. Please, just listen to me. I'm trying to fix this, trying to fix myself." His words, though sincere, hit her like a wave. There was a part of her that wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that the Josh she had loved was still somewhere beneath the surface. But everything she had seen, everything she had experienced, told her otherwise. "I can't keep going around in circles with you, Josh. I need answers, real ones, not more empty promises." Her voice wavered, the hurt cutting through her words. "I'm done being a pawn in your family's games." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Josh spoke again, his voice was soft, almost broken. "I'll do anything to make it right. I'll leave my father. I'll walk away from everything if it means I can have you back. Please, Melissa, you're the only real thing in my life. Don't leave me now." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I don't know, Josh. You've made me doubt everything, everything we had." Before Josh could respond, Melissa abruptly ended the call. She couldn't listen to him anymore. The emotional weight of everything was suffocating. As the silence of the room settled in, her thoughts turned once again to Gregory's offer. The temptation to let everything go, to let the scandal fade away and disappear from her life, was strong. But at what cost? Would she be signing her soul over to a man who had controlled every aspect of his son's life? Would she be playing into the Montgomery family's game just to preserve her dignity? Her phone rang again, and this time it was a call from her lawyer, Amelia Jacobs. She had been working with Melissa on handling the media fallout and the potential legal issues surrounding the wedding incident. "Melissa, I think we need to talk," Amelia said, her tone grave. "I've been getting calls from the Montgomery family. Gregory is trying to arrange a settlement. He wants to make this go away quietly. He's offering you a lump sum, but I need to warn you, this comes with strings attached." "Strings?" Melissa echoed, feeling a surge of anger. "What strings?" Amelia's voice lowered as if speaking more cautiously now. "The Montgomerys don't do anything without expecting something in return. This could be a way for them to keep their hands clean. I can't advise you to take the money. It could mean a lifetime of being tied to them, under their control." Melissa's grip on the phone tightened. This is exactly what Gregory wants. He wanted to buy her silence, to make everything go away without anyone ever knowing the truth of what had really happened. "I won't let them control me," Melissa said, her voice steady with resolve. "I'll fight this, Amelia. I don't want their money. I want my life back." "Good," Amelia said, her voice filled with approval. "I'll make sure to block any deals. But you need to brace yourself. This is going to get uglier before it gets better. Gregory won't stop until he's buried the truth." The weight of the conversation settled over Melissa like a storm cloud. She hung up, her mind racing. The future seemed uncertain, a tangled web of lies and deception. But one thing was clear. She couldn't let Gregory or Josh control her any longer. She had to find her own way out of this. As Melissa stared out the window at the darkening skyline, a sense of determination washed over her. She wouldn't let her life be defined by the Montgomerys or by Josh's past. It was time to take back control. The storm was coming, but she was ready to face it. The weight of the decision sat heavily on Melissa's chest, but her resolve had strengthened in the days since her conversation with Gregory. She would not let him or anyone else dictate her life, not anymore. But there was still the matter of Josh. Her mind kept returning to him, to that desperate phone call. She had ended it, yes, but the words he had said, the pain in his voice, still echoed in her mind. Did he truly want to change? Was he capable of change? Or had she been fooling herself into believing that the man she loved could be salvaged from the wreckage of his past? It was the next day. and Melissa found herself walking through Central Park, the chill of autumn creeping into the air. The golden leaves drifted lazily to the ground, and for a moment it felt like the world was still, calm. But she knew better. There was no calm left in her life, not while the shadows of her relationship with Josh still loomed large. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and her heart skipped when she saw the name on the screen. It was Josh again. She had decided after much deliberation that the next time he called, she would finally give him the truth he deserved. She would tell him that they couldn't go back to what they once had, that it was over. She was tired of being caught between his promises and his actions. She needed clarity, and she needed to move forward. But as she answered the call, she felt a sudden surge of vulnerability. "Melissa." "It's me," Josh said, his voice softer than it had been in their last conversation. "Please, just hear me out. I swear I'm not asking you to forgive me, but I have to explain." Melissa sighed, stopping in her tracks. "Josh, I don't know what else there is to explain. You struck me, in front of everyone. Do you understand what that means? How can I ever forget that?" "I don't expect you to forgive me," he replied quickly, the urgency in his voice unmistakable. "But I need to tell you what really happened. You deserve to know everything." She didn't respond immediately. The calmness of the park around her only made her more aware of the storm swirling within. She wasn't sure she was ready to hear whatever excuse or revelation Josh had to offer, but there was something in his voice that made her hesitate. Maybe, just maybe, she owed it to herself to know the full truth. "Okay," she said, her voice steady but tinged with a quiet anger. "Tell me." Josh exhaled heavily on the other end of the line. "I never had a chance, Melissa. I've been living in my father's shadow my whole life. The man you saw, the one who struck you, he wasn't me. He was the man my father made me become. That slap. That was the result of a life where I've been taught to suppress everything, my feelings, my desires, my dreams. I've spent years trying to please my father, trying to live up to his expectations of who I should be. But when you came into my life, you reminded me that I was capable of more. You showed me that I didn't have to be just his son, but I was too weak to stand up to him, and I hurt you because of it." Melissa felt her pulse quicken, a part of her wanting to believe him, to see the vulnerability he was showing. But another part of her recoiled at the idea that he was blaming everything on his father. He had hurt her. He had made a choice. "But why, Josh?" she whispered, the pain in her voice breaking through the calm she had tried to maintain. "Why did you hit me? Why did you let that happen?" "I didn't want to," he said urgently. "It was like everything inside me snapped. I couldn't take it anymore. I was trying to make everything work, the wedding, the family, the business, trying to please everyone, trying to please him, and I forgot about us. When I saw you standing there, everything I had been suppressing just exploded, and I hated myself for it." She could hear the raw emotion in his voice, the guilt that seemed to weigh him down. But guilt wasn't enough. Guilt wasn't going to erase what had happened. "Josh," she said slowly, each word heavy with meaning, "you can't keep blaming your father for everything. You chose to marry me. You chose to strike me. That's on you." "I know," he replied, his voice cracking. "And I am sorry, more sorry than you'll ever understand. But I want to make it right. I know I can't erase what I did, but I can fight for you, Melissa. I can fight for us. Please don't walk away, not like this." For a moment Melissa was silent, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. Was she really ready to walk away for good? The truth was, she wasn't sure. She loved him, or at least the man she once knew. But the man who had struck her, the man who had allowed his father to control his every move, she didn't know if she could ever trust him again. "I need space, Josh," she said softly, her voice shaking despite her efforts to remain strong. "I need to figure out what's best for me, and right now I need to be alone. I can't do this with you anymore." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. She could feel Josh's heart breaking, but she knew this was the only way to find the clarity she needed. "I understand," he said finally, his voice small. "But if you ever change your mind, if you ever think there's a chance for us, I'll be waiting." Melissa didn't respond. She couldn't. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew she couldn't keep living in limbo, trapped between the man Josh had become and the one she wanted him to be. When she ended the call, she felt like a part of her had died. She had been forced to make a choice between love and self-preservation. And right now, self-preservation was the only thing that mattered. As Melissa walked back through the park, the rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, soaking her hair and clothes. She didn't care. The world seemed to be reflecting her emotions, the storm inside her mirrored in the sky above. She stopped beneath a tree, looking up at the gray clouds as they loomed overhead. The decision was made. She would walk away, not because she didn't love Josh, but because she couldn't keep waiting for someone to change when they were not ready to change for themselves. And just as the rain grew heavier, Melissa knew that the road ahead would be long and painful, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a strange sense of freedom. The rain continued to pour as Melissa made her way back to her apartment. She didn't notice the wetness soaking her through, the chill creeping into her bones. Her mind was racing, each thought like a rapid current, pulling her deeper into a sea of confusion. Walking away from Josh hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. He had shown her who he had become, and as much as she loved the man he used to be, the reality was too much to bear. She needed space, time to heal, to understand who she was outside of him, outside of the Montgomery family's dark shadow. But there was still something gnawing at her, a feeling that something wasn't quite right, that there was more to the story. Lena's visit had only added to the growing sense that she hadn't uncovered all of Josh's secrets. There was a side to him that she didn't know, and even after everything, she couldn't shake the feeling that more was lurking beneath the surface. Melissa arrived home soaking wet and dropped her bag on the floor. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. Josh. Her heart tightened, but she quickly swiped the notification away. Instead, she sat on the couch and buried her face in her hands, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. She didn't want to cry over him anymore. She didn't want to be trapped in that cycle of hope and disappointment. And then, as if the universe had answered her unspoken prayer, her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Josh. It was Amelia, her lawyer. Melissa hesitated for a moment before answering, the last remnants of her emotional strength holding her back. She knew this conversation would be one of those pivotal moments. Amelia had been handling the fallout from the wedding and dealing with the Montgomery family's attempts to silence her, but Melissa had no idea how far they were willing to go. "Melissa," Amelia's voice came through the phone, professional, yet carrying an edge of concern. "We need to talk. It's about the Montgomerys." Melissa's stomach dropped. "What about them?" "Gregory has made another move," Amelia continued. "I've received some documentation that you need to see. It's about Josh." Melissa's pulse quickened. "What's going on?" Amelia paused before responding. "It seems Josh isn't the only one with a hidden past. There's more to the story than you've been told. A lot more. Tell me everything." Melissa's voice was firm, her heart hammering in her chest. She needed the truth now. She couldn't keep living in this fog of uncertainty. "Josh's relationship with you, his past with you, it isn't the first time he's been caught in the web of family secrets," Amelia said, her voice growing more serious. "It goes back much further than either of you realize." Melissa stood, her hands trembling as she clutched the phone tightly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Josh's actions, the way he's treated you, the way he's been manipulated, it's all part of a much larger pattern. This isn't just about love or betrayal. It's about power, control, and the lengths his family is willing to go to." "Is that why he hit me?" Melissa whispered the question, not sure if she wanted to hear the answer. Amelia's silence spoke volumes before she replied. In part, yes, but there's more to it. The violence wasn't just an emotional outburst. It was a culmination of years of pressure, manipulation, and betrayal. Josh has been living in a prison his entire life, and you were a part of that prison, whether he realized it or not. Melissa sank back onto the couch, her mind spinning. So what now? What do I do with this information? You need to know exactly what you're dealing with. Gregory has been playing a much larger game with you at the center of it. You were never just a pawn in Josh's life. You were the key to unlocking a much darker side of the Montgomery's empire. Why are you telling me all this now? Melissa asked, her voice low, struggling to process the weight of the words. Because you need to know the full extent of what you're up against. I've uncovered some documents from a private investigator I hired. Josh is not the first woman Gregory has controlled. There's a pattern, a history of manipulation that goes back decades. The women Josh has been involved with, they've all been part of his father's plan to maintain power, to ensure that no matter who Josh chooses, no matter who he loves, the Montgomerys will always have the upper hand. Melissa's mind was racing. Is this what I've been walking into? Her emotions were all over the place, and the world that had seemed so stable just a few weeks ago now felt like quicksand, pulling her deeper and deeper into its darkness. I need to see these documents, Melissa said, her voice sharp. I need to know everything. Amelia agreed, telling Melissa that she would send the information over immediately. As the conversation ended, Melissa felt a knot in her stomach. The Montgomery family's control over Josh, over her, was deeper than she could have ever imagined. She had thought the violence was the worst of it. But now she realized that what lay beneath the surface was a far more dangerous game. Melissa sat in silence, her mind buzzing with the implications of what Amelia had revealed. Gregory had not just ruined Josh's life, he had ruined the lives of every woman Josh had ever loved, every woman who had been caught in his father's web. But now, the game was different. Melissa wasn't going to be a victim. She wouldn't let herself be a pawn in Gregory Montgomery's cruel game. And as the rain outside started to subside, Melissa made a vow to herself. She would uncover the full extent of the Montgomerys' lies. She would expose their secrets, and no matter what it took, she would take back control of her life. The path ahead would be hard, but it was the only one left. No more secrets. No more manipulation. She was done being the pawn. She was ready to play her own game, and the Montgomerys wouldn't know what hit them. The rain had stopped, but the weight of the world on Melissa's shoulders only seemed heavier with each passing moment. She stared at the documents that Amelia had sent over, her heart pounding as she sifted through the carefully outlined evidence of Gregory's decades-long manipulation. There were records of Josh's past relationships, connections to business deals, and personal letters that spoke of the hidden truths the Montgomery family had long buried. It was like opening a Pandora's box, one that she had never expected to encounter. Melissa leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples as the overwhelming details swirled in her mind. Everything made sense now. Josh's coldness, his inability to truly choose his own path, the violence he had inflicted on her. It had all been part of a larger, more sinister plan that Gregory had devised long ago to maintain power, control, and his family's legacy. But no more, Melissa thought. This stops here. The documents were clear. Josh wasn't the only one to suffer under his father's control. Every woman in his life had been manipulated, every relationship molded to fit Gregory's desires. They were all pawns in a game he played to preserve his wealth and influence. But it wasn't just about money or status. It was about power, the power to control every part of Josh's life, including who he loved and how he loved. As Melissa reflected on what she had read, a surge of anger bubbled up inside her. She had been naive, thinking she was merely a part of a love story gone wrong. But this was far worse. This was about something much bigger, something that reached deep into her own life, her own identity. I can't let this go, not anymore. Her phone buzzed again. It was another message from Josh, the same pleading tone, the same promises of change, the same desperate attempts to explain. She didn't even bother reading it. The words were all the same, hollow and meaningless, without action behind them. Every time he reached out, it reminded her of his inability to break free from his father's grip. He'll never change unless he wants to, she thought bitterly, but I can't wait for him anymore. Melissa's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from her lawyer, Amelia. Melissa, Amelia's voice came through, urgent and grave. I need you to meet me in person. We've got a situation. Melissa's heart skipped. What's going on? I can't explain over the phone, Amelia replied. But it's about Gregory. There's something you need to know. We have to act fast. Without hesitation, Melissa grabbed her coat, her pulse quickening. She had been playing this game by Gregory's rules for far too long. It was time to take control of her own future, and for the first time she didn't feel afraid. Melissa arrived at Amelia's office with a sense of urgency, her heart racing as the words "we need to act fast" echoed in her mind. She had thought she was prepared for anything after the documents, after all the revelations about Gregory's manipulation, but there was something in Amelia's voice that hinted at more trouble on the horizon. As she entered the office, Amelia stood by the window, her back turned as she gazed out at the city. The tension in the room was palpable, and Melissa could feel it in the pit of her stomach. "Sit down," Amelia said, her voice low and controlled. Melissa obeyed, sitting in the chair across from her lawyer. "What's going on?" she asked again, her voice tight. Amelia turned to face her, her expression grave. "Gregory Montgomery has been making moves behind the scenes, not just to silence you, but to control the entire narrative of what happened at the wedding." Melissa's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" "I've been tracking his dealings," Amelia explained. "Gregory has been pulling strings, making sure that you and Josh's story are buried. He's bribing media outlets, using his connections to make sure that everything goes away. Except he's also making threats against you. You've been marked, Melissa. If you don't act quickly, he'll have you silenced for good." The words hit Melissa like a physical blow. She could feel the blood drain from her face as the weight of the situation became clear. Gregory was ruthless, and he would stop at nothing to ensure his family's legacy was protected, even if it meant destroying anyone who got in his way. But Melissa wasn't afraid anymore, not like she used to be. She was ready to face this head-on. "What can we do?" Melissa asked, her voice steady now. "I'm not going to let him win. Not this time." Amelia nodded. "We have one shot at this. I've been gathering evidence, talking to some key people who are willing to help expose what Gregory's been doing. But it's going to take more than just paperwork. We need leverage. We need a public stance." Melissa's heart pounded as she realized what Amelia was suggesting. "You want me to go public?" Amelia didn't flinch. "Yes, you have to. It's the only way to stop Gregory from controlling the narrative. If you speak out, expose what you know, the public will demand answers. You'll become the voice of the truth, of what Josh's father has been hiding, and it will force Josh to choose between his family and his future." Melissa swallowed hard, her mind racing. The idea of going public terrified her, but it was the only way to break free from the suffocating control the Montgomerys had over her life. "Are you ready for this?" Amelia asked softly, watching Melissa closely. Melissa took a deep breath. "I am. It's time." The press conference was set. Melissa had made the decision to take back control of her life. The Montgomerys would no longer dictate her future, and the truth would be exposed, no matter how painful it might be. As she stood at the podium in front of a sea of reporters, cameras flashing, microphones thrust into her face, Melissa felt the weight of the moment. The spotlight was on her, and she was about to speak her truth. She glanced at the rows of reporters, at the faces she had seen countless times in the tabloids, the ones who had turned her pain into entertainment. Now they would hear her story. Taking a deep breath, she began. "I am Melissa Montgomery," she said, her voice clear and strong. "And today, I'm here to speak the truth about the man who has controlled my life for far too long, Gregory Montgomery." The words came easier than she expected. She spoke about the manipulation, about Josh's inability to break free from his father's shadow, and about the violence that had shattered her life. She spoke with the raw honesty that had been buried for so long, and she saw the shock in the eyes of the reporters, the disbelief in the faces of the people who had once believed the Montgomery family's carefully crafted image. As the final words left her lips, Melissa felt a sense of liberation wash over her. She wasn't just telling her story, she was taking back her power. She wasn't the victim anymore, and for the first time, she felt like she could finally breathe. The fallout was immediate. News outlets picked up the story. The Montgomerys' carefully crafted image began to crack. Josh, despite his attempts to shield his family, was forced to confront the reality of his father's reign. And though it hurt, it was the first step toward breaking free. Melissa didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She had made the right choice. And in doing so, she had taken back everything that had once been stolen from her. She was free. The days after the press conference were a whirlwind of attention. The media coverage exploded, and the world was finally paying attention to the truth that Melissa had been hiding for far too long. The Montgomery name, once synonymous with power and untouchable wealth, was now tainted, its dark secrets spilled out into the public eye. But as much as the world seemed to be listening, it was Melissa who felt the weight of every word, every accusation, and every camera flash. She hadn't expected the fallout to be so swift, so intense. The world wanted answers, and they were all coming for her. The guilt, the pain, the fear. Everything she had tried to bury was now laid bare. But there was a strange sense of liberation in all of it. For the first time, Melissa could hear herself breathe, the tightness in her chest loosening as the walls around her began to crumble. The Montgomerys could no longer control her narrative. Josh had called her once more. She hadn't answered. The messages were filled with apologies, promises of change, and pleas for reconciliation. But she was done. He was still a prisoner to his family, to the very people who had destroyed her. There was nothing he could say that would undo the damage, nothing that could take back the slap, the betrayal, or the years of manipulation. But despite her resolve, there was a deep ache that lingered in her chest. She missed the man she had loved, the Josh she had once believed in. She had hoped for so long that he could be her escape from the world that suffocated her. But he had only been another cage. Melissa sat on her bed one evening, scrolling through her phone. There were endless messages from friends, well-wishers, reporters, and even strangers who had followed her story. But one text stood out, a message from her mother. "You've made the right choice, darling. But you need to leave now, before they find you." Her mother's warning sent a chill down her spine. The Montgomerys wouldn't stop. Gregory wouldn't stop. And if she stayed in New York, there was no telling what lengths they would go to. She had made her stand. She had spoken her truth. But now, it was time to disappear. For good. It was a week before Melissa made her move. She packed a small bag, knowing she couldn't take anything too heavy, nothing that would leave a trail. She'd left behind the life she had known, the apartment, her belongings, everything that had once been hers. None of it mattered anymore. The decision was final. She was leaving New York, and she was leaving behind the ghosts of her past. There was nothing left for her here, not with Josh and certainly not with Gregory. She booked a one-way ticket to a quiet town on the West Coast, somewhere far enough away that the Montgomerys wouldn't think to look for her. Somewhere she could start over, build a life that was truly her own. As she walked out of her apartment for the last time, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. The city that had once been filled with dreams now felt like a cage, its towering buildings suffocating her. The life she had left behind, full of wealth and power, now felt empty, a facade that had been built on lies. She caught a final glimpse of the skyline as her cab sped away from the city. It was time to let go. Melissa settled into her new life in a small, coastal town. It wasn't glamorous. There were no luxury cars, no mansions, no glittering events to attend. It was simple, peaceful, and just what she needed. The town was filled with friendly faces and quiet streets, a stark contrast to the chaos she had left behind. She found work at a local cafe, a place where no one knew her name or her past. It felt good to be anonymous, to blend in with the crowd instead of always being the center of attention. She worked long hours, her hands becoming accustomed to the motions of preparing coffee and serving pastries. It wasn't much, but it was hers. At night, she would take long walks along the beach, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore, providing a soothing rhythm to her thoughts. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace with herself. The anger, the sadness, and the confusion had slowly started to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of self-reliance. But even as she began to build this new life, the memories of New York, of the Montgomerys, still lingered. She had cut ties with Josh, but she couldn't erase the years of manipulation, the love, the betrayal. It was a scar she would carry forever. One evening, as she walked along the beach, she received a call. She hesitated, her heart racing as she saw the name on the screen. It was Josh. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She had promised herself she wouldn't listen to him again, that she wouldn't fall back into the same cycle of hope and disappointment. But something in his voice, something in the way he had sounded during their last conversation, made her hesitate. She answered, "Melissa." Josh's voice came through raw and desperate. "I don't know where you are, but I need you to know something. I've been trying to fix myself, trying to get out of my father's grip. I'm not the man you saw that night. I'm trying to change. Please, just give me a chance to prove it to you." Melissa stood still, the wind tugging at her hair, the sound of the ocean in the background. For a moment, she thought she might break. The past was clawing its way back into her life, threatening to pull her under again. But then, she remembered why she had left, why she had made the decision to walk away. "I can't, Josh," she said quietly, her voice firm. "You need to fix yourself for you, not for me. And until you do that, I can't be part of your life. You need to be free of your father, free of all of this, before we can even talk." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Josh finally spoke, it was with the kind of pain that broke Melissa's heart. "I understand," he said softly. I hope one day you'll forgive me." She didn't respond, knowing that no matter how much she wanted to, she couldn't give him that forgiveness just yet. She ended the call and stared out at the ocean, feeling the weight of the decision she had made. It was over, and for the first time in her life, Melissa felt free.